King Harald Ironwill emerged from a small coastal settlement in early 9th century Scandinavia. His family belonged to a modest lineage of traders who transported timber and animal hides across northern waters. Their influence was limited, but their understanding of regional alliances allowed young Harald to observe how authority shifted between clans. Guys, can you help me to hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and it's my dream. Sorry for interruption, it's humble request. Let's jump into the video. Harald's early years were shaped by exposure to maritime culture, seasonal raids, and resource-driven conflicts. He learned to manage small crews, barter with distant settlements, and interpret the motives of rival leaders. This gave him a practical foundation for leadership long before he pursued any form of rule. By his late teens, Harald became known for his organizational discipline rather than personal aggression. He prioritized planning, preparation, and coordination during expeditions. Local chiefs began to rely on him for logistical decisions when arranging voyages or preparing winter reserves. As political tensions increased between coastal and inland clans, Harald used his reputation for structure to negotiate temporary truces. These agreements did not establish long-term peace, but helped stabilize trade routes. His involvement in these negotiations raised his visibility among influential families. Harald's ascent began when neighboring clans faced shortages caused by harsh winters. He organized joint resource-sharing networks that prevented regional collapse. Chiefs respected the efficiency of his approach and supported his proposals for cooperative councils. These councils gradually centralized decision-making. His leadership expanded when he introduced standardized measures for trade and taxation. This allowed settlements to calculate contributions with greater accuracy and reduced disputes over resource allocation. Chiefs saw these systems as beneficial for maintaining predictable economic cycles. Harald continued consolidating influence by encouraging coastal settlements to adopt unified maritime codes. These codes regulated navigation rights, port fees, and responsibilities during shared voyages. Settlements accepted them because they reduced conflicts and improved transaction reliability. His rise to kingship occurred when multiple clans voluntarily granted him authority to oversee broader regional administration. They formalized his position by establishing an oath-based hierarchy. The new structure required chiefs to pledge support for public works, resource distribution, and defense coordination under Harald's oversight. Once recognized as king, Harald initiated infrastructure projects aimed at improving mobility across territories. He commissioned the construction of timber bridges, storage barns, and fortified docks. These projects lowered transport risks and allowed resources to circulate more consistently throughout the year. Under Harald's reign, agricultural management became more systematic. He encouraged settlements to map fertile zones, measure yearly yields, and record livestock growth. This produced the earliest structured agricultural records within his domain. Leaders could plan for shortages with increased accuracy. Harald also created a rotational labor system. Each clan provided laborers for specific public tasks during preset periods. This ensured that no settlement carried disproportionate responsibility. It also strengthened cooperation between groups that previously competed for influence. His administrative approach was grounded in predictability rather than intimidation. Harald believed that structured governance reduced internal conflict more effectively than punitive measures. His officials collected information on local disputes and attempted mediation before escalation occurred. As trade with other Norse regions expanded, Harald regulated foreign merchant activity. He set standardized levies on imported goods and required accurate inventories before long-distance voyages departed his ports. This system increased revenue and improved maritime safety. Harald's reign also marked an improvement in record-keeping traditions. Scribes in his court created timber-bound ledgers detailing trade flows, seasonal weather patterns, and council decisions. These records provided valuable data for future planning. The king used them to assess long-term trends within the region. He established structured training for young warriors who served in local defense groups. Instead of relying on individual chiefs to train their own fighters, Harald introduced uniform practices for weapon maintenance, shield formation, and winter survival skills. This increased efficiency during coastal defense operations. Harald encouraged skilled artisans to relocate near his main settlement. This centralization supported the production of tools, ship components, and agricultural instruments. Craft specialization grew. allowing for higher quality goods and more consistent output. His court became a hub for productive craftsmanship. The king maintained frequent meetings with council representatives from each settlement. These meetings allowed discussions about environmental conditions, regional risks, and expected trade cycles. Harald used the information to plan seasonal distributions and ensure that no settlement experienced severe shortages. One of Harald's significant contributions was the development of early maritime inspection protocols. He required shipbuilders to meet specific stability standards before vessels were approved for long journeys. This reduced shipwrecks and increased confidence among traders. During his reign, he strengthened relations with inland communities by establishing designated exchange points. These points facilitated the trade of coastal fish, salt, and tools in return for grain, wool, and iron. This balanced internal commerce and reduced the need for risky inland raids. Harald also focused on population management. He commissioned small census counts to track the number of households, skilled workers, and livestock across territories. These counts helped distribute responsibilities more evenly during large projects. In the field of regional defense, Harald emphasized coordinated strategy instead of spontaneous retaliation. He compiled information on common raid routes and instructed settlements to establish lookout posts at consistent intervals. This reduced vulnerability along coastal borders. Harald's influence extended to cultural practices as well. He encouraged public assemblies where storytellers, craftsmen, and negotiators shared knowledge. These gatherings helped unify clans through shared information rather than forced conformity. He supported the preservation of oral genealogies. Although not written down, these genealogies were recited during council sessions to clarify alliances and responsibilities. Harald believed that transparent lineage knowledge reduced succession disputes. The king also improved the distribution of salt, an essential preservative. He expanded salt production along shallow coastal flats and regulated storage methods. This allowed larger quantities of food to survive through winter, strengthening long-term survival rates. Harald introduced structured guidelines for forest management. Settlements received instructions on when and where to harvest timber to prevent overuse. Sustainable practices increased shipbuilding material availability and reduced disputes over forest boundaries. His reign promoted modest advancements in metal work. Blacksmiths, under his patronage, experimented with refining techniques that produced sturdier tools and more uniform weapon edges. This contributed to more reliable agricultural performance. Harald also encouraged cooperative fishing networks. Instead of competing for small coastal zones, settlements rotated access to rich fishing grounds according to predetermined schedules. This reduced conflict while maximizing total fish yield across regions. Throughout his rule, Harald emphasized stability through routine. Seasonal calendars guided planting, harvesting, construction, taxation, and maritime departures. This structured rhythm allowed both coastal and inland populations to plan more effectively year after year. He created an advisory group composed of elders, craftsmen, and experienced navigators. They monitored the efficiency of his policies and proposed adjustments based on practical observations. Harald valued this input and regularly implemented suggested changes. Harald's administration adopted early safety measures for cold season travel. He issued guidelines on clothing layers, pack weights, and supply division. These guidelines reduced winter casualties and improved communication between distant settlements. His reign also supported the spread of basic instruction for children. Elders taught them counting skills, clan histories, and identification of local plants. Although limited in scope, this helped maintain consistent knowledge across generations. By the later years of his rule, Harald Ironwill had built a governance structure grounded in predictability, organization, and resource management. His emphasis on standardized systems allowed multiple clans to operate with reduced friction and increased coordination. His leadership was recognized for its administrative clarity rather than force. During King Harald Ironwill's reign, legal structure expanded alongside administrative systems. While he emphasized order and resource management, he also approved strict protocols for handling violations that threatened stability. These protocols applied to oath-breaking, theft of public resources, and interference with regional agreements. Oath-breaking received the highest level of attention because Harald's governance depended on reliable commitments between clans. An oath ensured predictable cooperation during trade, defense, and public works. Any disruption to these agreements could destabilize entire regions, making enforcement necessary. To maintain consistency, Harald assembled a council of elders, navigators, and legal advisors. They drafted fixed categories of violations and the corresponding consequences. Their objective was to create a uniform system that every settlement could recognize and follow without dispute. One of the punishments formalized during his reign was known as the rope of bones. This method existed in fragmented forms before Harald but became standardized under his rule. It was used specifically for severe oath-breaking, particularly when the violation threatened shared resources or military coordination. The rope of bones required the preparation of rib bones from deceased warriors or criminals. These ribs were selected for durability and were cleaned through boiling or scraping. The bones were then drilled or carved with notches that allowed them to be connected into flexible lengths. Craftsmen assembled the ribs using leather strips or sinew. The strips threaded through the notches in each rib created a chain-like structure that resembled a segmented rope. This produced a device strong enough to bear weight when suspended between posts or wooden frames. Settlements designated specific areas for carrying out this punishment. These areas were located away from residential zones to avoid disrupting daily activity. They often consisted of a wooden frame, 2 tall posts, or a simple set of fixed horizontal beams capable of supporting significant load. The process began with a formal declaration of guilt. Harald required clear evidence from multiple witnesses or recorded agreements. The council assessed the details and confirmed whether the individual had intentionally broken an oath or violated shared commitments. If confirmed, the rope of bones punishment proceeded under regulated steps. The offender's arms, torso, or legs were bound with the rib-constructed rope. The design prevented easy movement because the rigid sections restricted bending. This increased the control officials had during the suspension. Officials lifted the bound individual onto the frame. The bone rope was attached to upper beams using knots or additional sinew lashings. The purpose was not to inflict direct wound damage but to create prolonged immobility. The restricted posture limited circulation and physical comfort. The length of suspension varied according to the severity of the oath broken. Minor violations involved shorter durations, often several hours. Severe violations linked to resource betrayal or military disobedience resulted in longer periods. The extended exposure caused gradual weakening of the muscles. The punishment relied on natural conditions rather than active physical harm. Wind, cold, and uneven pressure on the joints produced discomfort without requiring additional tools. Officials monitored the area to prevent wild animals or unauthorized interference from affecting the procedure. Records from Harald's court indicate that the rope of bones served a symbolic purpose. The use of ribs from deceased individuals emphasized the consequence of disregarding communal bonds. It reflected the belief that oath-breaking undermined the foundation of shared survival. Just as broken bones undermined bodily structure, village scribes documented each application of the punishment. These records included the name of the offender, the nature of the broken oath, the location of the punishment site, and the time the suspension began and ended. The documentation ensured consistency across settlements. Some offenders were released after serving the designated hours. Their release required confirmation from the council that the suspension met the required duration. The individual was then expected to resume contributions to the community, though under closer observation. Those responsible for assembling the bone ropes received training to ensure uniform quality. The ropes needed to withstand weight without fracturing. If a rope broke during suspension, the procedure was repeated once the structure was repaired. This upheld procedural integrity. The use of ribs required a steady supply of suitable materials. Officials collected ribs from battlefield sites or executions. They avoided disturbing graves, as grave interference held negative cultural implications. The supply process followed guidelines to prevent misuse. Harald's administration encouraged regional consistency in the crafting process. They distributed diagrams that outlined rib size, spacing, and attachment methods. These diagrams helped settlements produce similar devices, reducing disputes about fairness in punishment procedures. Other punishments existed alongside the rope of bones, but none held the same symbolic weight. Minor disputes were addressed with fines, resource contributions, or temporary labor assignments. Only oath-breaking involving high-level agreements triggered the bone rope procedure. Officials supervised the offender during suspension and ensured that no member of the community attempted to negotiate early release. Bystanders could observe from a distance, though large crowds were discouraged to maintain order. The viewing served as a reminder of communal expectations. Upon completion of the designated duration, officials loosened the bone rope using knives or designated tools. The rope itself was not typically discarded. It was inspected for damage and returned to storage for future use. This maintained resource efficiency. Some settlements reported that the suspended individual occasionally fainted during the process due to restricted circulation. In such cases, the council allowed brief lowering to verify survival before continuing. The intention was not to cause death, but to reinforce legal accountability. Environmental conditions influenced how the punishment affected offenders. In colder months, suspension caused faster muscular fatigue. In warmer seasons, discomfort stemmed from heat exposure and prolonged immobility. This variability was accepted as part of the natural conditions of the method. Harald insisted that the punishment be applied without personal hostility. Officials were instructed to follow the procedure calmly and consistently. Any deviation or excessive force could lead to disciplinary action against the official responsible. The bone rope method gained recognition outside Harald's territories. Neighboring regions noted its structured application and associated it with Harald's broader administrative reforms. Some communities adopted modified versions that used wooden segments instead of ribs. Harald's court maintained a central storehouse for the most durable bone ropes. These ropes were used for high-profile cases involving influential oathbreakers. Their design was more elaborate, with smoother carved surfaces and reinforced notches for extended durability. Written reports indicate that the rope punishment helped reduce the frequency of serious oath violations. Clans became more cautious when entering agreements because breach of commitment carried predictable consequences. This predictability reinforced Harald's administrative system. The council occasionally reviewed the procedure to ensure that its application remained consistent with established rules. Adjustments included changes in rope length, improvements in attachment methods, and updates to monitoring requirements. These changes maintained the method's reliability. When offenders completed their punishment, they were sometimes required to participate in community service tasks. These tasks acted as reintegration mechanisms and demonstrated the individual's renewed commitment to communal stability. Officials tracked completion through written records. The rope of bones continued to be used throughout Harald's reign as a functional component of legal enforcement. It supported the broader objective of maintaining order in a diverse network of clans. The method allowed the king to reinforce legal structure without relying on uncontrolled violence. In the later years of King Harald Ironwill's rule, regional conditions began to shift. Trade routes expanded beyond traditional coastal zones, exposing settlements to new materials, foreign customs, and unfamiliar administrative ideas. These developments gradually reduced dependency on Harald's centralized structure. As younger leaders emerged, they questioned long-standing systems that relied on rigid oaths. Many viewed the rope of bones procedure as a method suited to earlier periods of limited communication. Increased travel and diverse trade contacts encouraged more flexible agreements instead of fixed oath-bound expectations. Harald continued to maintain his administrative routines, but his influence slowly weakened as settlements grew more independent. Some clans established their own internal councils and adjusted legal practices to suit local conditions. These modified systems did not always align with Harald's original framework. Documentation from this period shows a reduction in the number of oath-breaking cases referred to the king's council. Local leaders increasingly handled disputes within their own territories. This shift reduced the frequency of punishments that followed the standardized procedures described. In his earlier reforms, the rope of bones method remained in use but saw gradual changes. Some settlements replaced the rib components with wooden sections to simplify construction. Others shortened suspension times as new forms of mediation gained acceptance among neighboring clans. Harald attempted to preserve uniformity by issuing updated guidelines for enforcement. These guidelines encouraged continued record-keeping and outlined expectations for fair administration. However, compliance varied widely, reflecting the growing autonomy of regional leaders. Population growth also contributed to the decline of centralized control. Larger settlements developed specialized roles within their own communities, decreasing reliance on the king's officials. This diversification made it more difficult for Harald's administration to supervise legal practices across distant territories. The availability of foreign metal tools introduced new possibilities for dispute resolution. Metal restraints replaced bone in some areas, and structured fines became more common for minor violations. These alternatives gradually shifted attention away from traditional symbolic punishments. As Harald aged, council members assumed greater responsibility for managing legal and administrative issues. Their decisions often reflected newer regional priorities, rather than the king's original emphasis on uniform procedures. This transition marked the beginning of a decentralized legal landscape. By the final years of his reign, the rope of bones served more as a legacy symbol than an active enforcement tool in several regions. Some communities preserved the ropes as ceremonial objects, representing commitment to order rather than functioning as instruments of punishment. Harald's decline was not characterized by conflict but by gradual transition. His systems had stabilized the region during earlier decades, but evolving circumstances made parts of his framework less relevant. Legal practices diversified as settlements adapted to external influences and internal growth. After Harald's death, his successors inherited a more fragmented administrative environment. They focused on local alliances rather than broad standardization. The rope of bones persisted in certain areas but eventually became a historical reference to earlier governance methods.